It was a regular Tuesday night. I had just come back from a late shift, the kind of shift that drags on forever and leaves you too wired to sleep but too tired to do anything useful. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop to check my emails. And there it was. Her name, Melissa Thompson. It hit me like a hammer to the chest. 5 years. 5 years without a word. 5 years since she packed up her things, slammed the door, and left my life in ruins. Now, out of nowhere, she had the nerve to email me? I leaned back in my chair, my pulse thudding in my ears. My first instinct was to delete it. Whatever she had to say, I didn't need to hear it. But curiosity, or maybe some sick part of me that still wanted answers, made me click it. The message was short. Too short for something that carried this much weight. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I need to talk. Please. No explanation. No apology. Just those few words. The whiskey burned on its way down, but it didn't do a damn thing to calm me. Memories hit me all at once. The fights, the lies, the day I came home to find her suitcase gone, and that pathetic excuse of a letter on the kitchen table. I need to find myself. That's what she said back then. Turns out, she found herself in someone else's bed. I didn't want to think about that now. I didn't want to picture her with him. That smug bastard with his perfect hair and perfect smile. A married man, no less. Yeah, I found out about him after she left. Small-town gossip spreads fast when someone like Melissa blows up their life in such spectacular fashion. She didn't just cheat. She did it loudly. I sat there, staring at my screen, torn between rage and curiosity. Why now? Why, after all this time, would she come crawling back? I reached for my phone before I even realized what I was doing. I still had her number saved. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I stopped myself. No, I wasn't about to make this easy for her. If she wanted to crawl out of whatever hole she'd been hiding in, she'd have to do better than a half-assed email. I shut my laptop, drained my glass, and told myself I'd forget about it. But the truth is, I couldn't shake it. That email was a ticking bomb in my mind, waiting to go off. And it did. The next day, I was at the grocery store when I spotted her. Melissa. She hadn't changed much. Same long dark hair, same confident stride. She was standing by the bakery counter, chatting with the cashier like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't shattered my life and walked away without a backward glance. I froze. For a second, I thought about walking right past her. But then she turned and our eyes met. Her expression shifted from shock to something that almost looked like guilt. Almost. Before I could stop myself, I was walking toward her. Melissa. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. You've got some nerve. The cashier looked uncomfortable, glancing between us like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. Melissa gave him a tight smile and waved him off. Can we not do this here? She whispered, her voice low and cautious. Why not? I shot back. You weren't exactly discreet the last time you decided to blow up my life. Why start now? Her jaw clenched. Please, let's talk somewhere private. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to cause a scene, to let the whole damn store know what kind of person she was. But instead, I nodded. Fine, let's talk. She followed me to the parking lot, her footsteps quick and tense behind me. I stopped by my car, crossing my arms as I turned to face her. You've got 5 minutes. Melissa sighed, running a hand through her hair. Look, I know you hate me. I deserve that. But I need to explain. Explain? I barked out a bitter laugh. Explain what? That you were bored? That you decided to have an affair with some married guy because your life wasn't exciting enough? What's there to explain, Melissa? She winced, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes. But then she straightened her shoulders, that familiar arrogance creeping back into her posture. It wasn't that simple, she said, her voice steady. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty damn simple. You cheated. You lied. You left. End of story. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. It's not over. And just like that, the storm hit. Her words hung in the air, freezing me in place. It's not over. I stared at her, trying to process what the hell that meant. Not over. We hadn't spoken in 5 years. 5 years of silence after she shattered our marriage and left me to pick up the pieces. So what exactly wasn't over? You're out of your mind, I said, shaking my head. It's been over for a long time, Melissa. She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing some dark secret. You don't understand. You won't leave me alone. Here we go. There it was, the twist, the excuse. She wasn't here to apologize. She wasn't here to make things right. She was here because she wanted something. Let me guess, I said, folding my arms. The guy you wrecked our marriage for? He's turned out to be a nightmare, and now you need me to fix it? Her face tightened, but she didn't deny it. I let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself? You left me for him. You destroyed everything we had. And now you're standing here expecting me to give a damn that things didn't work out the way you planned? Melissa glanced around the parking lot, her eyes darting like she was afraid someone might overhear us. She wasn't used to being on the receiving end of public humiliation. That had always been my role. Look, can we please just talk somewhere else? She whispered, practically begging. This is serious, Jake. I was about to shut her down, tell her to take her drama and shove it. But something about the way she said my name stopped me. I hadn't heard her say it in years, and hearing it now, it hit harder than I expected. Fine, I muttered. Get in. She hesitated for a moment before walking around to the passenger side. As she slid into the seat, I couldn't help but notice how she glanced over her shoulder, like someone was following her. I got in and started the car, driving in silence until we reached a small park on the edge of town. The parking lot was empty, the trees casting long shadows across the pavement. Talk, I said, cutting the engine. You've got my attention. Make it count. Melissa took a deep breath, twisting her hands in her lap. She looked nervous, not something I was used to seeing from her. Melissa was always in control, always pulling the strings. But now, she looked scared. I left him, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. A month ago. He wasn't who I thought he was. Shocking, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. The married guy who cheats on his wife turned out to be a scumbag? Who could have seen that coming? Her eyes snapped to mine, anger flashing across her face. You think this is funny? He's dangerous, Jake. I blinked. Dangerous? That wasn't what I expected. What are you talking about? Melissa looked away, staring out the window like she couldn't bear to meet my gaze. He's been following me, showing up at my apartment, calling me at all hours. I changed my number, moved cities, it didn't matter. He always finds me. Something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't the story I thought she'd tell. So what? You think he's stalking you? She nodded. Yes, and it's getting worse. He threatened me last week. I frowned. Threatened you how? Melissa's hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her messages before holding it out to me. I took the phone and read the texts on the screen. Unknown number. You can't hide from me. You're mine, Melissa. Always have been. Always will be. If I can't have you, no one will. I felt a chill run down my spine. You've gone to the police, right? I asked, handing the phone back. She laughed bitterly. Of course I did. And guess what? He's got friends in high places. They won't touch him. Who is he? I demanded. What's his name? Melissa hesitated, biting her lip before answering. Michael Steele. That name hit me like a punch to the gut. Wait, Michael Steele? As in Judge Michael Steele? She nodded slowly. Judge Steele was practically royalty in our town. Respected, powerful, untouchable. The kind of man who could ruin someone's life with a single phone call. Jesus, Melissa, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. You really know how to pick them, don't you? I didn't know who he was when it started, she said quickly. He never told me he was married, never told me he was a judge. By the time I found out, it was too late. He wouldn't let me leave. And now you want me to what? Protect you? She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I don't know what else to do. I have no one else to turn to. I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to tell her to get lost, to let her deal with the mess she'd made. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I used to love, couldn't turn away from the fear in her eyes. You should have stayed gone, I said quietly. She looked down, her shoulders slumping. I know. Silence stretched between us, heavy with things left unsaid. Finally, I broke it. Does he know you're here? Melissa shook her head. No, I've been careful. I wasn't sure if I believed her. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about our broken marriage anymore. This was something much darker. And whether I liked it or not, I was already in too deep. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at Melissa like she was a stranger. Maybe she was. The woman sitting next to me wasn't the one I used to know. Or maybe this was the real her, and I had just been too blind to see it before. Michael Steele. A name that carried weight in this town. A man whose word could make or break careers. I'd seen him shake hands with police chiefs, slap backs with politicians, and give speeches about justice and integrity. The thought of him lurking in the shadows, sending threats to my ex-wife, twisted my stomach into knots. Let me get this straight, I said, breaking the silence. You're telling me that Judge Michael Steele, the same guy who hands out sentences like he's God, is stalking you? Harassing you? Melissa nodded slowly. I told you, Jake. He's dangerous. Dangerous. That word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to laugh, to tell her that this sounded like some bad crime drama, but the fear in her eyes made it hard to brush off. Why me? I finally asked. Why not go to someone else? A lawyer, a private investigator, hell, even the press? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Because I don't trust anyone else. He's too connected. And I knew you wouldn't ignore me. No matter how much you hate me. She wasn't wrong. As much as I wanted to pretend I didn't care, as much as I wanted to slam the door on this part of my life, I couldn't walk away. Not when something about this felt too real. Still, I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. You're leaving something out, I said. I know you, Melissa. You're not telling me the whole story. Her gaze flicked away, her fingers drumming nervously on her thigh. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Michael wasn't supposed to be more than a fling. I clenched my jaw. I didn't want to hear this, but I forced myself to stay quiet. He came into my life when things between us were already falling apart. She continued. He was charming, attentive. I thought it was just a distraction. But then he got possessive, controlling. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He made me feel like I owed him something. I gritted my teeth. And you still stayed. Her eyes snapped back to mine, sharp with anger. You think it's that simple? You think I didn't try to leave? You don't know what it's like to be with someone who holds all the power. Maybe not, I shot back. But I know what it's like to be blindsided by someone I trusted. That shut her up. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees outside. Why now? I asked after a long pause. Why reach out after all this time? Melissa hesitated, and for a second, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. Because he knows about you. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the car. What? She glanced at me, guilt etched across her face. I never told him about us. But somehow he found out. He knows we were married. He knows where you live. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Are you telling me this guy is coming after me now? Melissa swallowed hard. I think he already has. My mind raced, piecing together moments that suddenly took on new meaning. The strange car parked at the end of my street last week. The unknown number that kept calling but never left a voicemail. The uneasy feeling I'd been brushing off as paranoia. I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. You dragged me into your mess. I didn't mean to, she said, her voice trembling. But if he thinks you're a threat to him, he won't stop. I shook my head, anger bubbling beneath the surface. This is insane. You're telling me that a judge, a man who's supposed to uphold the law, is stalking you, threatening you, and now he's coming after me? Why? What the hell does he want? Melissa's gaze darkened. Control. He wants control over everything. His wife, his reputation, me. And what do you want from me? I asked, my voice low. I need help, she said quietly. I can't do this alone. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. You want my help? After everything you did? I know I don't deserve it, she whispered. But if you walk away, he'll win. And neither of us will be safe. The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to be pulled back into her chaos. But something told me it was too late. I was already in the crosshairs. And Michael Steele wasn't the kind of man who missed his mark. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. Melissa's words echoed in my head like a siren. If he thinks you're a threat, he won't stop. This wasn't just about her anymore. Somehow, without warning, I'd been dragged into a game I didn't even know I was playing. And the opponent, a man who could ruin me with a whisper. I turned to Melissa, my jaw tight. You're telling me that the same guy who sends out prison sentences for a living is stalking you, threatening you, and now he's got his sights on me? Yes. And you waited 5 years to tell me this? Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. There was no defense, no excuse that could make this better. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to think. Okay, let's assume everything you're saying is true. What do you expect me to do? March into his courtroom and tell the world that the Honorable Judge Michael Steele is a psychopath? You realize how that's going to play out, right? He'll crush me. I don't want you to confront him, Melissa said, shaking her head. I just need someone who knows. Someone who can help me figure out what to do next. And you think I'm that person? I barked out a bitter laugh. Why? Because we have history. Because you think I'll just forget everything you did and come to your rescue? She flinched, but her gaze didn't waver. Because you're the only person I've ever met who doesn't scare easy. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could say a word, something caught my attention. A car. Black. Expensive. Parked at the far end of the lot. And someone was sitting inside. Melissa, I said slowly, keeping my eyes on the car. Is there any chance that's just a coincidence? Her head snapped toward the car, and the color drained from her face. No, it's him. I felt my pulse quicken. You're sure? She didn't hesitate. I know that car. My mind was already racing. The park was empty, quiet, and secluded. The perfect place for someone to watch without being noticed. The car wasn't running, but the figure inside wasn't moving either. Okay, I said, keeping my voice steady. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to get out of the car and head for the trail. Walk like you don't see him. I'll follow a few minutes later. Melissa's eyes widened. Are you crazy? What if he follows me? That's what I'm counting on. She shook her head, panic creeping into her voice. No, this isn't a movie, Jake. You don't know what he's capable of. Neither does he. She stared at me for a moment, her expression a mix of fear and disbelief. You're serious. Dead serious. Now go. Reluctantly, she opened the door and stepped out. She pulled her jacket tight around her and started walking toward the trail, her footsteps quick but not hurried. I watched the car. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from a distance, I could tell he wasn't your average creep. His suit was tailored, his shoes polished. He looked more like a CEO than a stalker, but there was something about the way he moved, deliberate, calculated. He wasn't here by accident. He was here for her. I slipped out of my car and followed, keeping my distance. The man walked casually, his hands in his pockets, as if he was just out for a stroll. But his eyes never left Melissa. I followed them down the trail, my footsteps silent on the dirt path. The trees closed in around us, blocking out the fading light. Melissa glanced over her shoulder, her eyes meeting mine for a split second. I gave her a slight nod. We reached a bend in the trail, and Melissa took a sudden left, disappearing from sight. The man hesitated for a moment before following. I quickened my pace, closing the distance between us. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. As I rounded the corner, I saw him, standing too close to Melissa. Too damn close. I wouldn't do that if I were you, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The man turned, his expression calm, almost amused. And you are? Someone who's had enough of your games. He chuckled, shaking his head. Games? Is that what she told you? I clenched my fists. I've seen the messages. I know what you've been doing. His smile faded. Careful, son. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I shot back. And I don't scare easy. The man's eyes flicked to Melissa. You dragged him into this? That was a mistake. I stepped between them, blocking his view. The only mistake was thinking you could keep getting away with this. For a moment we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Then he smiled again. We'll see about that. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the trail. Melissa let out a shaky breath. He's not going to stop. No, I agreed. He's not. But neither was I. The man disappeared down the trail, his footsteps crunching on the gravel until the sound faded into the trees. I stood there, fists clenched, my body still humming with adrenaline. Melissa was trembling. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself like she was holding her whole body together. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're welcome," I shot back, my eyes still locked on the path where Steele had vanished. "What, you'd rather I let him corner you out here? You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "You don't know him like I do. He doesn't get scared. He doesn't back off." I turned to her, my jaw tight. "Then we make him scared." Melissa blinked, as if the idea had never crossed her mind. "You don't get it, Jake. He's untouchable. He's got people everywhere, cops, judges, politicians. If he wants to bury someone, they disappear. That's how he's stayed in power for so long." I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet my gaze. "No one's untouchable. You just have to know where to hit them." For a moment, she stared at me like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. Maybe she was. I wasn't the same man she left behind. The old me would have walked away. But not now. "Come on," I said, leading her back to the car. "We need to figure out what he's hiding." Back at my house, we sat at my kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey between us. Melissa hadn't touched hers. She just sat there, staring at the glass like it held all the answers. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. If Steele was this powerful, there had to be dirt on him somewhere. No one climbs that high without stepping on a few necks. "Did he ever tell you anything?" I asked. "Slip up? Mention something he shouldn't have?" Melissa shook her head. "He was careful. Always careful." I kept digging, scrolling through articles, social media posts, anything that might give me a lead. But Steele's public image was spotless. He was a pillar of the community, a man who gave to charity and delivered rousing speeches about justice. It made me sick. Then I found something. A photo. It was buried in an old news article about a charity gala. Steele stood in the center, smiling that politician's smile. But it wasn't him that caught my attention. It was the man standing next to him. "Wait a second," I muttered, zooming in on the photo. Melissa leaned over my shoulder. "What is it?" I pointed at the man. "That's Detective Harris." Her eyes widened. "You know him?" "Yeah," I said, my mind racing. "He's one of the top detectives in town. Works major cases, high-profile stuff. He's been around forever." And suddenly, things started clicking into place. Detective Harris was known for two things: solving impossible cases and making sure certain ones never saw the light of day. "Steele's got cops in his pocket," I said. "Harris is one of them." Melissa's face paled. "That's why the police wouldn't help me. He's got them wrapped around his finger." I sat back, rubbing my temples. "We're not going to win this by playing fair. We need to make him sweat." She frowned. "How?" I leaned forward, a plan already forming in my mind. "Steele's biggest asset is his image. He thrives on his reputation, the perfect judge, the upstanding citizen. We take that away from him and he crumbles." Melissa looked skeptical. "And how do we do that?" I smiled grimly. "We dig. We find his secrets and we make them public." Her eyes darted to the window, as if expecting Steele to appear out of the shadows. "Jake, he's not going to let that happen. If he finds out what we're doing, he won't find out," I cut in. "Not until it's too late." Melissa stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, what do you need me to do?" I met her gaze, my expression hard. "Tell me everything. Every conversation, every threat, every time he crossed a line. I need the whole picture." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Okay, but you're not going to like it." Her story. Melissa started talking, and the more she said, the darker the picture became. Michael Steele wasn't just a stalker. He was a manipulator, a man who saw people as pawns on a chessboard. He knew exactly how to push, how to corner, how to make someone feel trapped. He didn't just follow Melissa. He controlled her. "He told me once," she said quietly, "that he could make me disappear, and no one would ever find me." My hands clenched into fists. "He wasn't bluffing," she continued. "He knew things, personal things, stuff he shouldn't have been able to know. He used it to keep me in line." "Like what?" I asked. Melissa hesitated, then looked down. "You." The word hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, me?" He knew about you, she said softly. Even before I left. He knew our history, our fights, everything. He said if I didn't keep quiet, he'd ruin your life too. I stared at her, stunned. You let him do this to you because of me? She nodded. I thought I was protecting you. But I was wrong. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Melissa anymore. Steele had been pulling strings in my life for years, and I hadn't even realized it. Well, that was about to change. We're going to take him down, I said, my voice cold and steady. Melissa looked at me, a flicker of hope in her eyes. How? I turned to her, determination burning in my chest. By showing him that some people don't back down. By the time Melissa finished telling me everything, the air in my house felt suffocating. Her story wasn't just a mess of bad decisions. It was a web of control, manipulation, and fear. Michael Steele wasn't a man who made mistakes. He calculated every move and he played people like chess pieces. But now it was time for someone to flip the board. I stood by the window, staring out into the dark street. My neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. He's not going to stop, Jake, Melissa said from behind me. You saw him today. He doesn't back down. I glanced over my shoulder. Neither do I. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. What are you planning? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. This is Harris. Bingo. Detective Harris, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's Jake. We need to talk. There was a long pause on the other end. Jake? As in Melissa's ex? That's the one. What the hell are you calling me for? I glanced at Melissa, who was staring at me with wide eyes. Because I think you and I have a mutual problem. And it's time we both stopped pretending we don't know who Michael Steele really is. Another long silence. You're playing a dangerous game, Harris finally said, his voice low. Yeah, I replied. But here's the thing, I'm not afraid to lose. I hung up before he could respond. Melissa stood up, her hands trembling. Jake, what the hell are you doing? Making noise, I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. People like Steele thrive in silence. They do their dirty work in the shadows, where no one can see them. But if we drag him into the light, he'll burn. Her eyes narrowed. You think Harris is going to help you? He's in Steele's pocket. Maybe, I said, shrugging. Or maybe he's tired of being controlled too. Either way, I just made him nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. Melissa shook her head. This isn't a movie, Jake. You can't just scare these people into backing down. Maybe not, I agreed. But I can make them sweat. The unexpected visitor, we spent the next hour combing through everything Melissa had on Steele. Old messages, photos, recordings, anything that could be used to build a case. But it wasn't enough. We need more, I muttered, scrolling through her phone. Something that shows the world exactly who he is. Melissa bit her lip. I have one thing, but it's risky. I looked up. What is it? She hesitated. I recorded him. The night I told him I was leaving. He didn't take it well. My eyes narrowed. And you still have that recording? She nodded slowly. But if he finds out I kept it. A knock at the door interrupted her. We both froze. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. No one should have been at my door at this hour. Melissa's face went pale. Jake, stay here, I said, grabbing the baseball bat I kept by the door. I crept toward the front door, peeking through the peephole. It wasn't Steele. It was Detective Harris. I opened the door, keeping the bat at my side. You work fast. Harris looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled. But his eyes were sharp, taking in everything. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside, letting him in. He glanced around, his gaze landing on Melissa. So it's true, he muttered. You're back. Melissa crossed her arms. Did Steele send you? Harris shook his head. No. If he knew I was here, I'd be a dead man. I closed the door behind him. Then why are you here? He turned to me, his expression grim. Because you're right. Steele's been pulling strings for years. And I'm done being his puppet. Melissa stared at him, disbelief written all over her face. You're switching sides? Just like that? Harris let out a bitter laugh. It's not that simple. Steele has dirt on everyone. That's how he keeps people in line. But I've seen the way things are going. He's getting reckless. Sloppy. People are starting to talk. I stepped closer. Then let's make them talk louder. Harris shook his head. You don't get it, Jake. This isn't just about Melissa. Steele's connected to some dangerous people. People who won't think twice about getting rid of anyone who threatens him. Then why are you here? I asked. Because I'm tired of being afraid, Harris said quietly. And I've got something you'll want to see. He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. What's on it? Melissa asked, her voice trembling. Harris met her gaze. Everything. I took the drive, my mind spinning. You realize what you're doing, right? If Steele finds out, he won't, Harris said firmly. Not if we're smart. But if you're serious about taking him down, you're going to need more than that recording. This is the smoking gun. Melissa took a shaky breath. Why now? Why help us now? Harris sighed. Because I've spent too many years looking the other way. And because Steele's losing control. He's desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. I nodded. Then let's make sure his next mistake is his last. Harris glanced at the door. I've got to go. If anyone sees me here, we're all screwed. I walked him out, watching as he disappeared into the night. When I turned back to Melissa, she was shaking. Jake, what if this isn't enough? What if he finds us first? I crossed the room and took her hands in mine. Then we make sure he regrets it. Her eyes locked on mine. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, hope. We're not going to let him win, I said. My voice steady. For the first time in a long time, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Let's finish this. The flash drive sat between us on the kitchen table, a small, unassuming piece of plastic that could blow up Michael Steele's entire world. Harris said it was the smoking gun, the kind of evidence that could take down a man who thought he was untouchable. Melissa sat across from me, twisting a napkin between her fingers. Her anxiety was palpable, and I couldn't blame her. We weren't just poking the bear anymore. We were dragging him out of his cave and daring him to attack. Are you going to open it? She asked quietly. I nodded and plugged the flash drive into my laptop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a folder popped up on the screen labeled Steele Files. I clicked it. Inside were dozens of documents, photos, and videos. Some of the file names made my stomach churn. Bribes_police, witness_tampering, blackmail_list. Jesus, I muttered. Melissa leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. Is that? Everything, I confirmed, opening one of the files. It was a list of names, politicians, police officers, business owners, all people Steele had dirt on. Each name had a note next to it, detailing what he had on them. Affairs, secret bank accounts, criminal connections. Steele wasn't just powerful. He was the puppet master, and the whole town was dancing on his strings. Melissa's face went pale. This is bigger than I thought. Bigger than both of us, I agreed. Which means we can't do this alone. She gave me a sharp look. What are you saying? I sat back, running a hand through my hair. We need to leak this. All of it. Get it out in the open where Steele can't bury it. Melissa shook her head. You think that's going to stop him? He's not going to sit back and let this happen. He'll come after us. Let him. She stared at me wide-eyed. Jake, this isn't a game. He's dangerous. So are we, I said firmly. For the first time in days, I saw something shift in Melissa's expression. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Determination. Okay, she said softly. What's the plan? I pulled up a secure email client on my laptop. We send this to everyone, journalists, law firms, watchdog groups. Anyone who can make noise. We don't stop until his name is everywhere. Melissa leaned closer. What about the video? The one I recorded? I nodded. We'll include that too. But we need to time this right. Once it's out, we can't take it back. She swallowed hard. And if he comes after us before it goes live? I gave her a grim smile. Then we make sure he regrets it. The unexpected call, we worked through the night, putting together the files, encrypting them, and drafting the email. By dawn, we had a list of recipients, investigative journalists, whistleblower organizations, and a few key players in town who might be looking for revenge. But before we could hit send, my phone rang. An unknown number. Melissa froze. Don't answer it. I held up a hand, silencing her. Something told me I needed to take this call. I pressed the button and put it on speaker. Hello? There was a brief pause. Then a familiar voice came through the line. Calm. Controlled. Jake. Michael Steele. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. I kept my voice steady. You've got a lot of nerve calling me. Steele chuckled, the sound cold and calculated. I was hoping we could have a civilized conversation. After all, we're both reasonable men. I clenched my jaw. Reasonable? Is that what you call threatening my ex-wife? Stalking her? Sending me warning shots? You misunderstand, Steele said smoothly. I never intended for things to escalate this far. But you forced my hand. No, Steele, I snapped. You forced mine. There was a pause. When Steele spoke again, his tone had shifted. Darker. More menacing. Careful, Jake. You're walking a dangerous path. So are you. Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally, Steele spoke again. I'm offering you a way out. Walk away now, and this all goes away. No harm, no foul. Melissa shook her head furiously, mouthing the word no. I ignored her. And if I don't? Steele's voice dropped to a whisper. Then you won't like what happens next. The line went dead. I set the phone down, my hands trembling with barely contained rage. Melissa stared at me. He's not bluffing. Neither am I. I turned back to the laptop and hovered my finger over the send button. This ends now, I said, and I pressed it. The email was gone. Sent. Everything we had on Michael Steele, the files, the recordings, the names, it was out in the world now. There was no taking it back. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of my laptop. Melissa sat across from me, her fingers trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Her eyes locked on mine, wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. It's done, I said quietly. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Yeah, it's done. But it wasn't over. Not yet. We both knew Steele wouldn't just roll over. He'd fight back hard. And the worst part? He wouldn't come at us with lawyers or public statements. No, that wasn't his style. He'd come at us like the predator he was, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I glanced at the window. The morning light was creeping over the horizon, casting long shadows across the room. And then bang, a sharp knock on the door. Melissa's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes wide with panic. Jake, stay here, I said, grabbing the baseball bat from beside the door. I moved toward the front door, heart pounding in my chest. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. I peeked through the peephole. It wasn't Steele. It was a woman. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with sharp features and a no-nonsense expression. Her hair was tied back in a tight bun, and she wore a tailored suit that screamed authority. I opened the door a crack, keeping the bat hidden behind me. Can I help you, Jake Porter? She asked, her tone brisk and professional. Who's asking? The woman pulled out a badge and held it up. Special Agent Karen Price, FBI. Melissa gasped from behind me. I stared at the badge, my mind racing. FBI? What the hell are you doing here? Agent Price lowered the badge, fixing me with a sharp stare. We need to talk. It's about Michael Steele. I stepped aside, letting her in. Melissa stood frozen in the kitchen, her eyes darting between me and the agent. Price walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She glanced around, taking in the room before turning back to me. You've stirred up quite a mess, she said. I folded my arms. Good. That was the point. Price gave me a tight smile. You don't know what you've just unleashed. Melissa stepped forward. Is he coming for us? Price's gaze shifted to her. He already has. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. What does that mean? Price pulled out a file from her briefcase and set it on the table. We've been investigating Steele for years, but every time we got close, he slipped through our fingers. He's got powerful friends, people who would rather see him on the bench than in prison. Melissa sank into a chair, her face pale. So why are you here now? Price tapped the file. Because you just gave us the break we needed. That email you sent? It's everywhere. The media's picking it up, people are talking. Steele's network is panicking. Good, I said. Price's expression hardened. Not good. Steele's desperate now. Desperate people are dangerous. Melissa's voice wavered. He's gonna come after us. Isn't he? Price didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. And he's not going to stop until he buries both of you. I tightened my grip on the bat. Then we don't stop either. Price raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you planning to do? Go after him with a baseball bat? If I have to, I said, my voice steady. Price sighed. Listen, I get it. You've been wronged. You want justice. But you need to let us handle this. We have the resources. We can protect you. Melissa shook her head. No one's protected me before. I stepped closer to Price. What's your play? Are you going to arrest him? Price hesitated. We don't have enough to arrest him yet. Not officially. Then why are you here? She leaned in, her expression deadly serious. Because you're bait. Silence fell over the room. Melissa stared at her. What? Price glanced at both of us. Steele's network is crumbling. He's paranoid, desperate. He's going to come after the two of you, and when he does, we'll be waiting. Melissa shot to her feet. You're using us as bait? It's the best way to draw him out, Price said calmly. You've already put yourselves in the line of fire. I'm offering you a chance to turn this around. Help us take him down. I glanced at Melissa, then back at Price. And what happens if he gets to us first? Price's expression didn't waver. That won't happen. Melissa shook her head. You can't promise that. No, Price admitted. But I can promise you this, if you don't help us, Steele walks free. And he won't just come after you. He'll destroy anyone who stands in his way. The weight of her words settled over the room. Melissa looked at me, her eyes pleading. Jake, I took a deep breath, then turned to Price. What do you need us to do? Price smiled. We set a trap, and we make sure Steele knows exactly where to find you. I nodded. Let's do it. Melissa's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. Are you sure about this? She whispered. No, I admitted. But it's the only way this ends.